Welcome to another episode of the Clean Palette Podcast. I'm your host, Justice Johnson. Today, we peel back the paint as we discuss the style of plein air painting. Plein air we have discussed in my episode on Claude Monet, who was an impressionist artist who primarily used plein air style painting. So now you might be wondering, what is plein air, Justice? Well, plein air literally means outdoors. So you would just take yourself outside of the studio and paint in nature itself. You wouldn't be using a reference photo, you would be physically outdoors while you're painting the outdoors. So plein air style painting really came about in the early 1800s with the development of being able to use tube paints. So before, you would either have to make it prior or like right there on the spot, or you wouldn't really be able to carry it outside of your studio. Tube paints are essentially what, tube paints are now, which look very similar to a toothpaste container. They were slightly different than they are now, but essentially the same style thing. With that, you would be able to really transport this paint a whole lot easier, and it was a little bit more durable where you could put it in a backpack or a sling, whatever you're using. I guess 1800s, they might not have had backpacks, but you get my point. So with that, I just kind of want to talk about my experiences with plein air and kind of what you need to know before you get started. I'm not a plein air expert. I have used plein air style painting 2 different times with 2 separate mediums. I've done it once with watercolor and then once with oil paintings. With plein air though, there is a little bit of a restriction that you gotta be aware of. You don't have the luxury of being in your studio, so you can't have everything to your availability. You have to pick and choose what you want to bring. With that being said, a lot of people like to use box-style easels. And box easels have containers and compartments that you can put all of your paintbrushes, your oils, and then sometimes people use mini canvas pads as opposed to bringing whole canvases. These, let me pull it up, these can run you a little bit more than your average easel, where your typical easel can cost anywhere from maybe like $30 to higher end ones being around $200. But these start a little bit higher, but not crazy, at around $40, but they're not the full standing. These ones are primarily made to be put on top of a table. If you're looking for a full standing one, on average, they're gonna run you around $100. For full standing, be able to paint at eye level without using some form of platform or table, around $96 to $99. The really, really fancy ones though can get anywhere from $150 to $200. So they're not crazy expensive, but they will run you a bit of money if you don't have one already. Do you need one? Not necessarily, but it does make it a whole lot easier than carrying everything separately. When I did a wedding painting, which I'll get into a little bit more later, I didn't have one, so I had to bring everything in a separate box with my easel and a chair and, bring everything I could to kind of makeshift a box-style easel, and I didn't have everything that would have made this go a whole lot smoother. So just make sure that you look into it. If it's something that's right for you, it might make your time a whole lot better, but if not really a big deal. But the first part I mentioned about not being able to carry everything, that is a big constraint. Having to blend tones ahead of time is a possibility that you could do, but you don't have all of your tones with you unless you just don't have that many paints. You can't bring all of your brushes, and then there are a few other things. But what I really like about it is throwing yourself out there and not using any reference photos. When I took a intro to drawing class in college. I'm not really an art major, but took a few art classes, and she refused to let us use any reference photos. She only wanted you to use objects that you were in front of because of the way that light hits certain things. You're supposed to see with your own eyes. When a camera takes a photo, it renders it and kind of takes away some of the character that an object has. So when you do this and you're outdoors, there's no camera that has already taken the photo and rendered out some of the shadows or cleaned up or softened some of the images. If you think about Snapchat, and when that takes a photo, it automatically smooths over a ton of different things. Your camera does that to an extent because it can only process, so many pixels. When you're out there, there's no pixels to have to worry about. You are there, you can see whatever you want. It is crystal clear if you have, the right glasses, but it's just very nice to be out there. One thing that I have to say that I don't necessarily like is sometimes the elements can get a toll on you. When I was doing a wedding painting, and I was asked to do this by a coworker who, we had been talking, her now husband, but at the time fiance, is an artist. And so I brought it up because I was on Pinterest, or my girlfriend was on Pinterest, one of us. And we had been seeing wedding paintings all over. And I thought this was really cool because wedding paintings are slightly different than like a wedding photographer, where I feel like a painting has more energy in it, where I'd feel more comfortable putting it on a wall. It has like the actual feeling of paint or oil paint, whatever you're using, just like brings so much more life than a real still photo. And the artist gets to put their creative touch on the moment itself, so it's a bit more meaningful in my opinion. So I was asked to do it, which I had never done anything like that, and I had prefaced that. The photo is on my Instagram at Justice Tries, but it was like such an honor to be able to be a part of that. The environment itself, though, is what I'm not really a big fan of. So it was scorching hot that day, and that puts its effect on the oil paint itself. The oil I use is typically maybe a little bit more viscous than olive oil. But when I had it after so much heat, it almost became thicker than honey, where now when I'm trying to blend tones on the canvas, it's just super goopy and super thick, and it just wasn't very fun to work with. It honestly became such a challenge to work with because you would have tones that you've already worked with and you just want to add a little bit more, and now it's just a glob, a goopy mess, and it just wasn't ideal. You also have outdoor environments like shading going as the sun goes up and down. Usually you try to go really quick with plein air style photos because of this. Also, it's a wedding, so you want to get done before the wedding's over, ideally. The lighting wasn't consistent, where as the sun started to go down, even the tones of the leaves and the trees behind them, it was an outdoor venue, it wasn't, like the greens weren't the same green as when I first started because of golden hour. Golden hour, if you're not aware, is about an hour before sunset, where, it has to deal with the way light and refraction change and disperse color. I'm not really going to get into that, but it adds a little bit more of a yellow hue, so the tones were slightly different. The oil itself started to get more viscous, and there were just other challenges, like there were bugs biting me, there were bugs trying to fly onto the canvas. But that's just my experience with oil. When it comes to watercolor paints, I've used those maybe once or twice. That has its own set of challenges, but I feel like that's slightly easier than oil, where you don't really have to worry as much with the environment messing with things. At least when it comes to heat. The wind with watercolor can mess you up because the wind will blow the water in certain directions that you might not have wanted it to go. So there are all these outside forces that will affect your medium itself. Visually, and being able to look at, or I should say, the observation of the subject is way better with plein air style painting. Manipulating the medium is where it gets a bit more tricky because of the outside forces where, you can't just control things like in your studio and you don't have the things that you want. There are perks. There are, some things that you might not like too much. But let me know what you think. I want to know how you deal with it. I want to know if you've done it before. Are you quick enough to really make sure that oil doesn't get too thick or that the sun isn't setting? Send me some of your plein air style paintings. I'd really like to get, a good grasp on them. And, if you haven't tried it, go outside and just go paint some things before it gets too cold. I've only painted when it's hot. I don't know what the environment would do when it's cold. And I feel like it'd be a lot of whites and grays, especially if you're in a cold spot like Michigan like I am. But this has been the Clean Palette Podcast, and I've been your host, Justice Johnson. Go out there, go paint some things, come back to me. Let me know how you felt, what you like. If you're here, go check out the new vlog I started. I wanted to, give you guys a little insight on what I do outside of the podcast and just kind of to keep myself on track with all the art that I've been doing. Go follow the art Instagram at Justice Tries. Go follow the art or the podcast page, Clean Palette Podcast. And until next week, stay creative.